Hello, I am back. It seems that recently I asked for something recently is this because there was discussions in university about ideology, about it being invisible or visible as a primary function, right? The okay, out of this came discussion about ideology being then agreed upon of being mostly invisible and also visible at the same time. What I mean by that is, well, an ideology can on the surface show what it wants. The actual actions of the ideology itself does change. Not so much change, but it can ultimately dictate other things. Just because someone says something, for example, does not mean that is what they follow. Just because someone does an action, that does not mean they follow it necessarily. Ideology is just like that. It is one of those things in which it is, if consistent, fantastic. If not consistent, it is ultimately a basically stupid ordeal. There are some ideologies and some things in which are consistent, some which are not, some which can coexist with others, some which can't. Why this matters is because I've been looking at more coverage regarding Ukraine-Russia affair. And ultimately, once more, it seems that liberals are taking the stance of once more supporting the imperialists. The reason I'm saying this is because liberalism in question is a serious issue, as liberalism in itself is bad because it says one thing but means another. Advocates of peace yet supports the imperialists against attacking those people. Examples of this was Syria. They wanted peace for the people, some of them, but then supported operations against Assad, even though Assad didn't do a lot of the stuff in which was proclaimed to him. Another, for example, was the almost ceremonial support of Palestine, where they can support Palestine in a ceremonial manner, but in any functional manner, which is long-term, no. Another is also wanting to support the people of China, where they say they support the people, but then attack the government in which the majority of people in China have support. Another example in this is ultimately Ukraine. Ukraine is in this example because this is where I include a new term: soft and hard imperialism. Hard imperialism is wanting to just physically taking over and replacing a region with other interests. Soft imperialism is more insidious though, and more common. That is using propaganda. That is ultimately using then the will of the people to justify imperialistic rhetoric. Soft imperialism also is in the theatre of economic imperialism. That is stuff like sanctions, trying to take down business or companies which oppose you, or ultimately trying to destroy the economy of the country in which is doing something, ultimately hurting the common people, not the government necessarily. That's why sanctions are so dubious in terms of being effective or not. Also, another interesting thing I've seen is how some here and everywhere else have really been liking to harping on to the whole thing about China wanting being a quite literal supporter of Putin and invasion, which isn't actually, which is actually an incorrect position. The For example, on Chinese media, it said this video.
Should conduct their relations on the principles of respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, non-aggression against other states, non-interference in the internal affairs of other states, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. These are the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, officially initiated by China, India, and Myanmar in June 1954. Empty sounding to some, these words have been guiding China's foreign policy and are enshrined in China's constitution. This open and inclusive concept has also been incorporated into UN declarations and widely regarded as basic norms of international relations. In a 2014 speech, Chinese President Xi Jinping noted that the 5 principles are integrated, interconnected, and indivisible. That means they have to be taken as a whole, with peaceful coexistence as the ultimate goal. Last April, Chinese President Xi reaffirmed the status of this concept as the basis of China's diplomacy. How does that concept then guide China's position on the Ukraine issue? A quick look at history reviews how the conflict has been a slow-motion train wreck for years. Despite pledges by Western leaders, the eastward expansion of US-led NATO and the positioning of potentially offensive weaponry closer to Russia's borders have been perceived by Russia as existential threats. Senior US diplomats, including George Kennan and Henry Kissinger, had warned against the dangerous consequences, but people didn't listen. Meanwhile, Russia's behavior is also increasingly perceived by the West as hostile and irrational, fueled by its suspected weaponization of radioactive material and other tough measures. The level of mutual trust has kept dropping, as has the prospect of peaceful coexistence. The United States may not see the 5 principles as universal, but it did sign up to the UN Charter, albeit following it only at will. The Charter's ultimate purpose is to maintain peace and security. It opens by opposing the breach of peace and calls for effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace. Have all sides to the Ukrainian dispute upheld the Charter at all times? Although the conflict has escalated, China has not deviated from its initial position, which turns out to be similar to that of many other developing countries. On March the 2nd, the UN General Assembly voted on the resolution to deplore in the strongest terms the aggression by Russian Federation against Ukraine. Yes, 141 countries voted for this resolution, which sends a strong message, yet 35 countries, including China, abstained, and 5 more voted against. Those 40 countries, mostly from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, make up over half of the world's population. The West's condemnation of Moscow is not universal, despite such assertions. It was another coincidence that March the 5th was the 124th birth anniversary of Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, the first Chinese leader to shake hands with Nixon upon his arrival in China. Premier Zhou was also the Chinese face behind the concept of peaceful coexistence.
That, for example, defines it better. And ultimately, in turn, that also means that the whole things of trying to saber rattle again is just that saber rattling. And that is what's concerning here, is that the whole double-edged nature of all of this is really concerning and should be concerning for everyone involved, especially in regards to this. The conflict in which we are dealing with regarding Ukraine is not a simple one. people from multiple positions can have multiple stances on it. For example, both a Christian-centric, for example, left wing, and a nationalist statement stance towards it can all be true at the exact same time. I will clarify. Russian Orthodoxy is one thing, in which Russia takes seriously. It has since the fall of the USSR, empowered by revisionists in the late Soviet Union. Some within Orthodoxy see, for example, Catholicism as fake, or fake Christianity, or something like that, or I won't go into it just to avoid stupid discussions, but either way, there's like a religious divide in which some see as it is defending Orthodoxy. Then you also have the issue of the two republics, that is of the Donetsk and Lugansk. Those two, for example, have a very different issue here, because they have been an ongoing thing for 8 years in which the international community, at least in terms of the five-eyed aligned ones, at least, have ignored, including Australia. And that is the issue. The whole issue behind it was glossed over and ignored. They didn't factor in the critical information in which was essential to all of this. And then also there's the fact of the instance in 2014 and so on. And that stuff matters also much as well, because at the end of the day, those sort of instances as well done by Ukraine in 2014 in Odessa is shameful. After this incident, I don't necessarily blame people for wanting to separate out of Ukraine. I don't really necessarily blame people for wanting to have Russia protect them after. Because after the incident, it was damn well shown already that Ukraine wasn't going to protect the Russian people, let alone protect anyone of relevancy or even common people. And that's where also it links into the Russia-phobia as of late, which is also fucking shameful. Why is this now a thing in which people seem to think it's a cool thing to have all of this extreme hatred towards Russia, destroying everything that's Russian, even though the one who actually caused most damage in the first place in the initial shift to the conflict isn't even Russia? And again, this is where the double talk of some people do matter, because ultimately then those people will be influencing public perception by the double talk. They will be misleading and distorting information and the factual reality of what happened. For example, again, the whole campaigns by liberals and so on. Can they achieve something? Yes. Is it long term? No. In most cases, no. As if something isn't going to be done strongly and guaranteed, the high chance is within a few years, whatever changes you made will be destroyed. And that is my message here in all this, is that people need to be really wary of double talk regarding this crisis. Avoid double talk and ultimately avoid being a hypocrite. Avoid trusting other hypocrites. Try to find out reality for yourself. Try and get and see what reality is regarding it. Because ultimately, some people may, for example, some people again, we bound in by their visible ideologies, also not recognizing or understanding the invisible ones. And for example, again, this can be some leftists or liberals, again, in this context, who are ultimately underneath all of that facade and martyrdom they are perceiving to show Western chevalierists and Western imperialists. And that is not going to be a good look for them in the long run. And that's why, for example, overseas, these fake people are looked down on in people who actually live in places where they have been targeted by the imperialist core. Because ultimately, these are people who are cowards and have not done anything to better the situation, aside from just when the time was needed, doing nothing and standing by while lies was happening, and ultimately then supporting the lies over and over and over. That is all for today.